My name is Gordon Douglas. I am the director of the Institute for Metropolitan Studies here at San Jose State University, and we are super excited to be collaborating today with our friends at Working Partnerships USA to share their exciting new report on working families housing. I'm going to pass it over to my friend Huascar, who's going to tell us a little bit about what they're up to, and we're here for some other announcements before we begin the main presentation.
Thank you so much, Gordon. My name is Huáscar Castro. I'm the Director of Housing and Transportation Justice at Working Partnerships USA. We focus on the creation of programs and policies to better the lives of working families, primarily right here in Santa Clara County. Some brief remarks about this exciting initiative to create new tools to create a cross-sector collaborative approach to housing solutions in partnership with organized labor, developers, nonprofits, and the public sector. And we're really excited to be partnering with the San Jose State University's Institute of Metropolitan Studies to dive into this work. We want to thank IMS for their partnership and for inviting us to collaborate in this event. Given this institution's background in exploring alternative and additional tools for combating the housing crisis, this partnership is a perfect fit, and we look forward to continuing to work together. With that, I will pass the mic back to Gordon Douglas, Director of the Institute of Metropolitan Studies, who will formally kick us off. Gordon?
Thank you so much, Roscoe. Yeah, let me just echo that. We're really excited to be partnering with you. And what we're going to hear about today is one of the, I think, most exciting new pieces of research and sort of advocacy coming out of the affordable housing production space, especially here in the South Bay. So it's something we're really excited about at the Institute to be a part of and to provide this opportunity for the public to learn more about this initiative. We're also really excited. This is, I think, the fourth or fifth year that the Institute for Metropolitan Studies has been able to do an affordable housing and social housing related event at this time of year. And in particular, for at least the second or third time, we are partnering with our friends at SV at Home for their annual Affordable Housing Month calendar of events. If you're not following along, definitely check out SV at Home and Affordable Housing Month, which happens every year here in May. And to tell us a little more about that, Emily Ramos from SV at Home is gonna present a little bit about their programs. Emily.
Thank you, Gordon. I'm going to share my screen um, for the present. Can you guys see the slide? All right. So hi everyone, my name is Emily Ann Ramos and I am the Tenant Protection and Empowerment Associate at SV at Home. It's an honor to be here with you today as part of Affordable Housing Month. And now at SV at Home, we are dedicated to housing justice through policy advocacy, leadership development, communications, and coalition building because we believe that everyone deserves a safe, stable, and affordable place to call home. Affordable Housing Month is all about coming together as a community to learn, engage, and take action. This year's theme is All In for Housing. It is a call to commitment, a reminder that solving the housing crisis requires every one of us to show up fully, our energy, our advocacy, and our collective will to create change. And that's why we're proud to be here alongside the incredible partners throughout Santa Clara County who are doing this work every day. The future we envision for the Bay Area, one where housing is a right, not a privilege, doesn't happen by chance. It happens because people like you are all in. So I encourage you to check out our full calendar of events to see the many ways you could get involved this month. And if you're not already part of the movement, now's the time. You could join us by becoming a member, signing up for our newsletter, or following us on social media to stay informed and engaged. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass it back to Gordon.
Thank you so much, Emily. We're really excited to be part of this once again, and big thanks to all the work that SB at Home does um, for our region. Um, Without further ado, I want to get our presentation started. As I said, we're really excited about this brand new report coming from our friends um, at Working Partnerships USA, who have been leading in the space of labor organizing and the fight for affordability in our region for many years. We're going to hear primarily hear from Jeffrey Buchanan, who's the Director of Policy and Public Affairs at Working Partnerships USA. And the way this will go is Jeffrey will present for about 25-30 minutes here before we pass it off to my friend Alex Shaffron, who I will introduce when we pass the mic to him to offer a little bit of response and take some questions from those of you in the audience. In the meantime, you're welcome to begin adding your questions through the Q&A in the webinar here, and we will make sure that we get to as many of those as we can before the hour is up here. So without further ado, Jeffrey, please take it away, and thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks so much for the intro, Gordon, and thanks to the Institute for hosting. Jeffrey Buchanan, Managing Director of Working Partnerships. If you're familiar with Working Partnerships, or if you're not familiar, we are a bit of a mix of a community organizing group and a policy think tank born of the labor movement here in Santa Clara County. We've been around for about 30 years, very involved in a whole host of issues around housing, from running the 2016 Measure A campaign out of our office to work to help to establish San Jose's rent control policies, to a host of other accomplishments together with colleagues and peers and coalition partners across Santa Clara County. Like everyone, I think else gathered here, we've been kind of struck by the challenges of this housing crisis, and but I think coming from a unique perspective of looking at both a set of working families and working people who, no matter what happens in terms of union organizing to be able to obtain, better wages and working conditions, that the rising cost of housing is just continuing to eat up whatever gains happen from worker organizing on the ground here in Santa Clara County. And so, really seeing a need to redouble our efforts, and, hearing from some of our friends in the labor movement, that they really want to see more about what they can do to help be a part of the solution. That really led us in recent years to be thinking about, what are the ways in which labor unions here in Santa Clara County can be able to provide, we think, a unique opportunity to partner with public sector partners, with the development community, and others to advance the kind of affordable housing that both creates, permanent affordability and perhaps greater stability, while creating the kind of good union jobs that we'd like to see in improving labor standards within the residential construction sector. I think it's not unique, this moment we're in, to be thinking about what could the labor movement's contribution be to affordable housing. For students of history, thinking back to the 1930s, and the days predating and in the early days of the New Deal, really the labor movement was a key player in the nascent efforts to really create a movement for affordable housing. Some of the very first federally funded affordable housing complexes in the United States were sponsored by union, like local labor unions, looking at the very first, non-wartime federally subsidized affordable housing development. The what is it? Oh man, of course my screen is not. Carl Mackey houses was actually a union of hosiery workers in Philadelphia, and named honoring an organizer who was killed on the strike line by scab workers. Still to this day, that development continues to be providing affordable housing for a whole range of families in Philadelphia. For those who are familiar with the East Coast and some of the co-op developments, tens of thousands of units in New York City were created by using labor union pension funds, sponsored by, in most cases, labor unions themselves, still providing a really substantial source of mixed income affordable housing in a city like New York. I think it's often forgotten that, it was the AFL's Labor Housing Conference that really spearheaded and wrote the Housing Act of 1937, which really, laid the groundwork for our public housing authority system and the Section 8 voucher program that really underlies so much of the federal contribution to affordable housing.
You're on mute, Jeffrey.
Folks on this call are probably more familiar than we are with just what kind of goals and where we are in our goals when it comes to affordable housing as a county. Certainly, we have really high benchmarks in our regional housing needs assessment of what we need to accomplish to be able to keep up with rising demand and that unmet demand here as a county. And while we continue to see progress towards our market rate housing numbers, those affordable and workforce housing numbers continue to be a real challenge to be able to meet the mark and the needs that we have as a county. And so I think that's led us to trying to think about, certainly the challenges that are facing union members and workers and their families here in Santa Clara County when it comes to those, housing costs rising much faster than wages, the kind of lack of stability that creates, and, really not seeing the kind of housing product that meets the needs of families that many are considering or have already moved out to places like Los Baños or Mountain House or other places in search of more affordable housing in the Central Valley, while still commuting in here into jobs here in the South Bay. And so, what could we be able to do to be able to meet the needs of workers who also are looking for good jobs in terms of our building and construction trades workers looking for good jobs within the residential sector, where we really haven't seen, much of a real, other than in some of the high-rise development, we haven't really seen the use of union workers at as high a rate as in, say, like commercial development here in the Bay Area. Same time, we see developers dealing with, higher development costs, expensive financing, complex financing systems to be able to get projects to pencil out and to bring them forward. And, also seeing some opposition to improving labor standards and dealing with some of the issues that I think our union brothers and sisters would like to see as, we look at solving our housing crisis here. Our cities and counties are really struggling here, and particularly in Santa Clara County as Measure A dollars run out, as for the city of San Jose as Measure E dollars that once subsidized permanent housing or put to other uses. And the demand continues to really outpace supply, and development is slow. While we do see some green, some positive spots of projects that are coming forward, including those that were, some that were announced or ribbon cuttings this month during Affordable Housing Month, we still are seeing too slow of development and the need for more tools to be able to get things done. So with all that in mind, working partnerships together with the South Bay Labor Council and the Santa Clara County, San Benito County Building and Construction Trades Council have been working on research for the last few years, thinking about what would it look like to kind of create a third way of housing development beyond just tax credit funded affordable housing and market rate development. What would it look like to create a system where local public and private partners could create a cost-effective, efficient method for building permanently affordable housing across incomes and good union jobs? Really reflecting on some of the conversation around social housing and some of the models that we've seen, within the United States, within other countries. What kind of ways could we be thinking about really, using some of the untapped resources and capabilities of the public sector at the same time as thinking about how, given limited access to dollars, how can we be bringing in more private capital, namely union pension fund dollars, to be able to get at some of these goals of creating good union jobs, thinking about a more speedy and efficient pre-development process in terms of, how financing is acquired, and hopefully be able to address more rent stabilization in the long term. To see, we've seen with LIHTC housing, because of how AMI has risen in recent years, for certain housing providers, they have been able to take advantage of the how the regulations of low-income housing tax credit program is written to really have some pretty significant rent increases seen by tenants. And so how do we provide that greater stability here going forward with looking at perhaps a third type of product when it comes to housing here in the county? As I said, we think pension resources, working people's money is underutilized here in solving working people's problems when it comes to affordable housing. Uh, union members here in Santa Clara County alone have almost $1.1 trillion in assets under management of the public and Taft-Hartley pension funds that they participate in. And, we have a large number of trustees of some of the largest public and private pension funds, not just in California, but in the world here in Santa Clara County. And so we've been working to have conversations with those trustees, with staff at pension funds, with fund managers and advisors to really think about what would it take to unlock some of that private capital and how could that play into trying to scale up opportunities for building permanent affordable housing here in Santa Clara County. Ooh, I don't know what that one is. Oh, okay, I think I skipped through that. So there's already examples. I forgot with this slide. There's already examples of how pension funds are beginning to invest in the Bay Area. The Housing Investment Trust of the AFL-CIO has had a couple of successful projects move forward with, from what we've heard, with low interest rates, really providing debt within some large developments in San Francisco. We think there's opportunities to figure out how can we partner with some of these fund managers that have billions of dollars in pension resources that are investing in housing. How do we try to tap that specifically here in Santa Clara County? Trying to think about overall goals for this project. Our goal is how can we set a set of policy and capital strategies to be able to get on a pathway to creating thousands of units of affordable housing, and at the same time, hopefully creating millions of hours of, well-paid construction work, union construction work, and on roads for hundreds of underrepresented workers to be able to get into those family supporting jobs within the building trades. And we think there's a really unique opportunity here, given both the interests and needs of all these players, but really the assets that we have here as a county. And in recent months, I should say, we've been lucky to convene, nearly 70 different stakeholders across Santa Clara County in partnership with leaders on our Board of Supervisors, within the city councils of San Jose, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, and, partners like the Chamber of Commerce, SV at Home, and others to bring together both, nonprofit and private development firms, bring together philanthropy partners, community organizations, elected officials, staff from the housing departments of multiple cities here in the county, and the Housing Authority in Santa Clara County to really dig in deep on a proposal about how we think some of these players can be working together. All that, we're hopeful to be able to release a more detailed, full report of the ideas that have come out of this working group in August. So hopefully this is kind of like a little bit of a preview of some of those ideas. And, really the kind of key innovations that we're putting forward, calling for the creation of hopefully, starting with some demonstration projects and then hopefully moving forward, then more of a strategic approach for what we're calling working families housing, mixed income, union built, permanently affordable, rent stabilized housing here in Santa Clara County. The key kind of, innovations that we're looking at in terms of what makes this different than, traditional development today, looking at utilizing the unique powers of a joint powers authority. That's a local government agency that brings together the powers of different jurisdictions, creating a public credit enhancement program to be able to benefit the creation of some of these mixed income, permanently affordable developments, creating a new tool, public equity, so the public sector can become an equity investor and replace that most expensive or often the most challenging to access part of the capital stack of financing affordable housing, really with that end goal of these mixed income, permanently affordable, greater rent stabilized units and good union jobs, and bringing really, we hope, more private investment specifically from large institutional investors like union pension funds. So how do those kind of components work together at an individual housing development level? So, really, we looked at the idea of piecing together revolving public equity, loan guarantees or credit enhancement, and that unique powers of the JPA is kind of the key recommendations of how we see this moving forward. We're going to talk about each of those component parts and then how they fit together at the end. So, revolving equity, this is the idea of public investment at low or no interest rate that can really revolve over time. So instead of an investment in a residual receipts loan as gap financing, providing an equity investment as gap financing, which would then allow our public agencies to take advantage of when economic opportunities arise for, say, a development to refinance, to be able to pull cash out, to be able to then make subsequent investments in real estate, to be able to make limited public dollars go further towards the mission of building more affordable housing over a period of time. In terms of guarantees, we think there's a two-pronged opportunity with the idea of creating a credit enhancement or loan guarantee policy within and programs within our local governments. One, if we're able to provide a public guarantee on real estate debt, it unlocks the opportunity for large institutional investors to be able to put more funding into housing. In our conversations with real estate investment advisors to some of the largest pension funds in California, providing a public guarantee around debt in a real estate investment like affordable housing development, that would really make that a very doable investment for a large pension fund or for a fund manager that is managing pension fund dollars, that you're aligning the kind of risk and return necessary for those investors who are highly regulated, that can't offer below market rates of return on their investments, by really aligning kind of risk and return in a way where they could be able to invest in affordable housing at a larger scale than they're doing now. We think it provides a really significant opportunity, and we think there's models of ways in which it can be done that limit the potential costs to local governments. And we'll talk about what that looks like in function here in a moment. And then lastly, this idea of creating a joint powers authority, that we think there's opportunities for both efficiency in terms of reducing the amount of time that an individual development takes to be financed, as well as really some unique legal authorities that come from our joint powers authorities. Their ability to go to capital markets and do things that if a local government were to do, they would be required to get voter approval when it comes to things like bonding against future receipts, other things that we would see really challenges in a local government by itself pursuing that kind of a strategy. So, digging more on the public equity, one of the really unique opportunities here of investing instead of in gap financing and the kind of residual receipts loans that most of our cities and the county of Santa Clara have traditionally made their investment vehicle for affordable housing. Becoming an equity investor, we think, provides the opportunity over time to be able to allow those dollars to be able to recycle. To look at an example here of a kind of prototypical housing development in, say, the city of San Jose. Say you had a $250 million or 250 unit building built in the city of San Jose that received a $38 million, so about $150,000 per unit subsidy from a joint powers authority or some other jurisdiction. That subsidy over time would allow for, as that development pays down its debt, and additionally, as that development is able to increase somewhat in value because of its mixed income capabilities, that would allow to increase in value to the point where you could refinance the project, pull out. In this example, we think about $24 million after 7 years to be able to make an investment in a subsequent project. And again, that that next project to be able to refinance down the line to make an additional investment, so that over a 20-year period, you may be able to have those dollars roll over, once or twice, where all of a sudden, for every dollar or every unit that you've subsidized over a 20-year period, you may actually be able to subsidize 2 units, as opposed to waiting for a residual receipts loan to see what happens of what money comes back in the kind of traditional way that we've been seeing our local governments invest. So we think there's a pretty strong opportunity to have, greater efficiency and, opportunity there. I will say that for these models, we're looking at the idea of a mixed income project where a third of the units are very low income, a third of the units are low income, and a third of the units are market rate. That's just one example. Obviously, we're painting in shades of gray, so we could look at what does it look like if you have deeper affordability? What does it look like if you have a more of a breadth of affordability? That may change, like what kind of dollars come out in this kind of revolving example, and may increase or decrease the amount of public subsidy that's used per unit. So some of these numbers are really just examples, not cold hard facts, I would say. But appreciate it. I know there'll probably be questions about some of these assumptions and things, but so trying to just illustrate some of that. Next slide. Finance tools. Okay, we already talked through most of that. So some of the examples on the public equity side, we already see in Montgomery County, Maryland. That's where we've, I think, seen the most kind of these kinds of transactions as of late. And so they've been pretty successful in doing hundreds of millions. This is actually an old number, but hundreds of millions of dollars in deals, investing in equity into mixed income projects. And we think it's a model that we can really build off of. When it comes to loan guarantees, this is really the idea of, either providing a guarantee of the full faith and credit of a public institution behind the real estate debt within a development, or pursuing something like we've seen the city of San Jose begin to pilot with a public jurisdiction doing a master lease across a development, so agreeing to essentially be the backstop if rent isn't paid, to make sure that rent is paid. So one way or another, either whether it's making sure debt is serviced or that rent is paid, having that kind of a public sector support to make sure that for investors they have a greater assurance that they're going to be paid on what the terms of their debt is. We think that this really significantly both attracts investors, private investors, particularly union pension funds, that could be a great way to attract that capital. And it significantly decreases the amount of direct financing, direct subsidy that comes from public agencies. In the models that we looked at, providing this kind of credit enhancement really could reduce the amount of public subsidy that's needed in half, because of both the reducing the cost of financing, reducing the interest rates that you're likely to pay on that debt, and allowing for higher loan to value numbers to be able to finance more of the project's total development cost through debt. There's a lot of examples that have been successful around this. King County, I think, is probably the best example, where they, for a number of years, going back to the 90s, have been having the County of King providing their full faith and credit to their housing authority to be doing real estate deals. And they've yet to be, have to tap that that guarantee to be able to keep moving in their development process. Move through that. Uh, the other piece in terms of public contribution, tax exemptions, I think this is an important part that we're still trying to figure out some of the details on, but like we see with low-income housing tax credit projects and other affordable housing, we'll need to really see a contribution in terms of the exemption from property taxes to make these deals work. I think it's an important point that we're looking at trying to figure out how do you ensure if you were to allow for say higher levels of income to be within these projects to be exempt from property taxes, how do you ensure that there's really strong public benefits to any kind of project that's advanced, so that we know that if we're not going to be receiving those dollars from property taxes, that there's significant benefits. And so in our report, we'll lay out a kind of set of initial recommendations about what we think that needs to look like. As we talked about, I think one of the things that we're hopeful to pursue is a couple of different demonstration projects. We're already in conversations with the County of Santa Clara and the City of San Jose around the potential of one or two potential demonstration projects. And so we're hoping, in addition to putting out a set of recommendations in the coming months here, to be working with city and county staff to come up with and capital partners and other development partners to identify if there are a couple of demonstration projects of this kind of thinking, of this kind of a model, to test out some of these assumptions and to see what would it look like, and is there a viable path to doing this at a greater scale. We at this point, we do think that if these demonstration projects were able to advance and it looked like there was a positive model here, looking at the idea of a joint powers authority, thinking about the ability to be able to do bonding against the contributions of member agencies to a joint powers authority, and doing it in such a way where hopefully it's self-sustaining, where a JPA could be through whether it's through nominal origination costs or asset management costs, being able to have its costs covered essentially through the real estate transactions and through the management of the assets that it owns. I think I'm already over time here. So with the goal, and I'd say in the long term, the goal would really be to figure out how such a strategy could fit into the existing capacities of some of our institutions, whether that's partnerships with some of our local agencies and jurisdictions, partnerships with regional agencies like the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority, trying to really figure out how can we create an efficient structure with whatever governance structure maybe goes forward that would be owning and co-developing these kinds of projects, with the goal of hopefully being able to have that entity be having its own credit rating, so that we could sunset a credit enhancement program and really kind of take advantage of an entity itself being able to have its own credit rating and get that kind of cheaper debt, and be able to advance and not create large issues for any of the participating jurisdictions when it comes to credit risk. So that's and how these things fit together. I will say, the idea would be, if we have, hopefully the County of Santa Clara, interested jurisdictions, the cities that are interested in participating, being a part of a joint powers authority that then creates its own public equity fund that it would be using to make investments into specific housing developments, and hopefully members of that JPA participating in crafting a credit enhancement program, where it would be using that credit enhancement to attract private capital of union pension funds or other institutional investors, that over time we can be able to more efficiently bring together financing on projects. We think cutting pre-development time maybe even as much as in half, by really having just two sources of funding: the public equity and that private investment in terms of the debt. So we think there's a big opportunity to get to efficiency, to get to good union jobs, to get to more affordable housing. but a lot of questions and other things I'm sure that we'll talk more about what people are thinking about here. And so, yeah, really our game plan, looking at how do we get to a demonstration project or two in the next year or two. We're hoping to be able to move forward on something. Figuring out, how can we get interested jurisdictions to come up with a plan of how they could work together to advance these types of projects. Assuming that we're successful around putting together a couple of demonstration projects that show that there's merit to these ideas, and then in the long term, looking at how do you get to a sustainable approach and long-term funding to be able to make that go forward. So I realize that was a lot. So I'll wrap it up there and we can move to discussions and questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeffrey. Really appreciate it. I'm going to pass right on to my friend and colleague, Dr. Alex Shaffron, from Shaffron Strategies, who we're also really thrilled to have as a visiting scholar at the Institute. Alex is going to lead some discussion here. Thanks, Alex.
Wow, it's great to be here. This is the only time of my year that anybody calls me Dr. Shaffron anymore. So it's always really good to be here. I think that Gordon, this might be like close to the fifth anniversary for those. I see some questions here for folks who I think have been at all of our IMS social housing talks over the years. I think it's about 5 years since we did our first social housing together with SV at Home, where the inimitable Regina Williams helped get us started. Where my other favorite doctor, Dr. Jennifer Martinez, then at CCI, kept us rolling, and the now secretary Tamika Moss closed us off, and it was a podcast episode, and now 5 years later, there's actual social housing being designed in Silicon Valley. So we're going to take absolutely no credit for this. But it is a real rare experience, and I'm just so excited that we get to do the soft launch of this work, Jeffrey, that you and Waskar and Neil and all the rest of the working partnerships folks brought on. I've been following this from the background for a while, so it's particularly exciting. Um, I have a couple of questions. I know some of the questions are coming in. Good to see you, Amy Hines Shake, Robert Wood. I know, Robert, this is definitely not your first rodeo here. So many people that are on the webinar that we've had before, other people that are new faces. Exciting that this conversation is continuing. I thought what we could do is maybe kind of take the questions in order of the presentation. And so if anybody has any other questions about the kind of technical aspects of the finance, kind of get them in now. But I think Robert asks a really good question just about the public equity. And I think this is the most important thing, in my opinion, to understand. When I saw it in the original draft ideas, it was a thing that made me pay attention to this process more seriously, because this is if there's a thing that is, for me, most important about social housing, it's probably the public sector taking an equity position in buildings and not just being a lending and being participating through bond debt, et cetera. Trevor, can you explain a little bit more about, again, Robert tends to think about equity as a thing that produces profit. Explain the equity, the public equity side of it, and what makes it different and what makes it important.
Yeah. So, I mean, traditional, private equity invested in town. Well, I guess there's kind of two ways that, whether it's affordable housing or market rate housing get at equity. For affordable housing developers, they're accessing their equity through going through the low-income housing tax credit process. And, they pursue that through making, applying through the state. It often takes quite a bit of time for that to happen, though I know the state is going through a reorganization process with hopes of making that quicker. And, federal regulations have changed that may open up more of those dollars in the future, but it takes a bit of time. But that's the traditional way that for affordable housing you get access to equity. Private equity, on the other hand, is really expensive, and that's part of why we see even market rate projects here in a city like San Jose, projects not moving forward because of that high expectation of delivering profits, internal rates of return of like 20% on that capital investment, that it's so hard to see projects move forward and, quote unquote, pencil out. So our concept is, what if we were to create an equity product where the public agencies would be the investor, uh, but they are not expecting a rate of return. They're not expecting an immediate return. They would be, privileged to any of the cash that's left over in a development after it, pays for its operating expenses and other expenses. If there was cash left over after you pay off your operating expenses, you pay off your debt service, put aside whatever you need for reserves, for maintenance and other things. If there is residual cash, that would come back to the public agency, but there'd be no expectation of it, so it would allow projects to be more easily to be feasible. And how the public sector would make its money back, again, would be through this refinancing and the long-term ownership, participating in the economic events of that development. And so instead of being a loan that's repaid, with a low rate of interest, and in some cases, doesn't actually need to be repaid, the expectation of return would be through participating in the economic event, through participating in refinancing, and hopefully being able to do cash out refinancing to be able to then take dollars out and put into subsequent investments that are aligned with this vision.
Uh, just taking that ownership position, I think, is so critical, not just financially and how catalytic it can be, as opposed to being in this very again, like so we had took subordinate debt. That if you don't need to be a finance expert to understand subordinate means subordinate. It's not a term that you always necessarily associate with the people driving. And that's typical of a sort of public sector in the United States that's slowly but surely over a half century, as long as most of us on this call have been alive, has been withdrawing from the primary lead position. And I think that's one of the things that is so important. And I think one of the things about why I think, again, it's such an important improvement from LIHTC is that it's not about critiquing LIHTC. I mean, LIHTC is successful from the perspective of investors. It's because you gave them equity, and it's very expensive equity that we pay for at the beginning, and then we have to pay for at the end when we have to buy the building back from them to prevent it from resetting. And so it's just cutting costs and yeah, model asking yourself, why is LIHTC so successful? Because it gives away the equity, and now we're going to change that. Um, Any other? I see there's one other question in terms of the vehicle from Jyotswar who's asking about reinvestment capital, whether this could unlock that. I'm not sure what you mean. Are you talking about CRA monies, Jeffrey? Is this something that we could always also ask that online, just if you want to
Yeah.
clarify what you mean, unless Jeffrey gets it?
Yeah, I mean, I think really we see the private investors in this case. Well, there could be models where you have like a slim cut of private equity that could be invested in a project like this. We think really institutional investors, particularly union pension funds, are best suited to be providers of debt, to be providing debt capital, whether that's senior debt or subordinate debt. We think there's opportunities there if you have a credit enhancement program where you're reducing the risk of a default or dollars not coming back that when you're investing in debt. We think there's a really strong opportunity talking with some of the leading real estate investment advisors to CalPERS, CalSTRS, the city of San Jose's two largest pension funds. If you had a public guarantee on loans or a significant credit enhancement program, they think that could unlock more of this kind of investment from pension funds, where they'd be able to say, yeah, this meets our regulatory criteria for the kind of returns we need to produce across our portfolio because it's low risk. That we think it could bring more private capital into play, particularly from mission aligned union pension funds or other philanthropic entities that have large endowments.
So let's go into the question of permanent affordability. So Amy, I asked a question you'll get often, which is a really good question, is that you mentioned permanent affordability. And so what does that mean for your vision of how this is going to operate? Are we talking about, deed restrictions that are going to expire? Are they longer term?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, I think some of this is we still need to develop exactly what it is. But with the public sector being the owner of these units, we think that you can create a restriction on what the regime of affordability looks like. It's not the case of like, yes, we've envisioned that there probably would be, private operators, maybe it's a private development partner that then is working as an operator as well. So hopefully within those agreements, it's really spelled out like what affordability levels need to look like long term.
Mhm.
And, we think even perhaps even more importantly, what rent stabilization needs to look like. In our models, we were modeling, no more than 3% rent increases year over year. And so what would it look like to say, we're limiting rent increases to, 3 or 4% year over year for tenants, as opposed to an environment now where, even if you're in a rent controlled unit in San Jose, you can still get a 5% increase. And if you're in a LIHTC project, you could see 10% increases. And so we think that there's real value there in terms of like long-term affordability, uh, you know, certainly to start off with affordable units, and like to have firm guidelines for what that affordability looks like in the long term of the operation of those assets, but then also that stability, which over time, uh, yesterday's very low income unit or low income family is today's very low income family. And so what would it look like if we're really stabilizing rent over 10, 20, 30 years? Pretty big changes in terms of the depth of affordability.
So let's back up now a little bit and talk about the process, because Amy asked a really good question about how this is kind of influenced or interacted with SB 555, which is the state housing study being done by Turner Center. I will say the back end work on this is done by HRNA. HRNA is also a consultant on the Turner work. And so I'm hoping that some of the ideas, especially around the centrality of equity, make it over. Give us a little sense, because actually I think you went pretty quickly through the pretty awesome group of humans that you managed to get together in a room to come out with this. This isn't just labor or just isn't just working partnerships doing this. Give us a little sense about kind of how you got to this moment.
Yeah, we've been talking with some of the folks that are working in SB 55, including the sponsor of that bill with Senator Wahab, who has participated in the work group that we put together here. So I think we started a process last August where we had a series of kickoff meetings and technical working groups where our technical assistants, consultants, HRA advisors were providing kind of some initial sets of recommendations. We've, subsequently went through a number of rounds of engaging with our policy committee and a set of co-chairs, and then, a number of roundtables with the development community, both on the market rate side and nonprofit side. So that's part of why we don't have a report to put out yet. We're trying to account for some of the great steers and ideas that have come up since then. But it's been I don't know, for me at least, it's been really heartening to see the willingness to engage on, hey, here's something new and different. Given that there's people in our community who've been doing the good work of building affordable housing for decades, who understand much more deeply than our organization, what it really looks like for actual deal making to make things work. But I think to see a willingness to at least engage and think about how can we maybe do things a little bit differently alongside of all the good work that continues on addressing our goals of permanent supportive housing and extremely low income housing. How can we look at serving perhaps some other parts of the housing need within here as a county, and being willing to have a conversation with labor unions and partners of labor unions around what this could look like and how to take on the challenge of low road contractors within the residential construction space.
So speaking of all those folks, Walter's going to come in at the end, I think, and give everybody a little bit of a sense of where this is going and how they can plug in. Again, this is the soft launch. It's not even the launch, and then there's going to be not even the actual building of it. So let's end on the JPA part, because that's the mechanism, and that's again a thing that is still being envisioned and being worked out. So just for folks, again, I think one of the important things, the reason why JPA is important is that maybe the city of San Jose or the county on its own are large enough to be able to do something like this, but all the smaller jurisdictions, with actually some of which are quite wealthy, are just not big enough. And the county is really only the unincorporated areas, or it does county things. It can't actually do things in jurisdictions without their collaboration, and has no way of getting their money without their collaboration. So that's what a JP ultimately does. But yeah, can you just give people a little bit of an understanding about kind of why you came along, why the JPA
Yeah.
became the vehicle? And then you can also answer the question you know I'm going to ask, because I ask it every time, which is, how does some people are nervous because this feels like Santa Clara County once again going it alone when we're trying to build BAFA, we're trying to build things at the region. But I think the way you've set it up is really smart, that these two things can really work together. So give us a little sense about how
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
imagining
totally.
that work together.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest benefits of a joint powers, yes, is like being able to bring the capacities and the mission alignment across different jurisdictions for tackling our housing challenge. Um, but there's a really unique power of joint powers authority specifically to be able to enter into agreements with cities to make contributions to that JPA, and then for that JPA to bond against those contributions, where if any of those individual jurisdictions were to say, hey, we want to take a couple $1 million a year over the next 30 years, and we want to use that to bond against to then create a pool of capital to invest in affordable housing. Well, all of a sudden, that's a general obligation bond you just created, and you got to go to the voters and get 2/3 support to be able to do that. Um, through a JPA, if you do that, it's legal. You don't have to go to the voters. You have opportunities there, and so we think, looking at some future revenue streams, particularly as we begin to pay off some of the redevelopment debt from the county, city of San Jose, some of our other cities that still have remaining dollars that they're going towards debt service in terms of tax increment. As that debt service is retired over the next 10 years, we think there's opportunities to think about, could we repurpose some of that revenue towards the goal of building mixed income affordable housing. And we realize there's a big challenge, getting cities and the county to work together. I don't want to pretend like that we thought that that's going to be really easy. We know that there's a history of challenges there, but we think it's a worthwhile conversation to try to have. And, that there are, just because of the capacities there, that seems like if we're able to make it work, that seems like the best governance structure for doing these kind of deals long term and developing that capacity to be able to put these kind of deals together and to reach our affordable housing goals. In terms of BAFA, I think we've had a lot of really positive conversations with the staff at BAFA, who are thinking about kind of similar sets of problems and similar, at least slightly aligned solutions. Where I think our hope at this point would be to figure out, could you, if we were so successful as to get jurisdictions bought into exploring a joint powers agreement to stand up this kind of governance, to think about how we make sure that there's partnership between that and BAFA, possibly even leaning on BAFA and the staff that it's going to be putting together to be doing underwriting and some of the kind of nitty gritty work of financing, to be able to partner together and use their capacities. And maybe over time there may be even ways that BAFA could lean on this institution. We'll see, but I think we're going in with really a goal of how do we take advantage of all the different assets of some of the great institutions that we have here working in this space. While also just trying to think about, hey, if we're doing something a little bit different, how do we make sure that we're creating spaces that are, have alignment of mission.
That's great. And I'm hoping if BAFA folks are listening or people are supporters of BAFA, there's no way this is going to work only on a vote of 9 counties all at the same time. Maybe hopefully that will happen and we will get a bunch of money, but you're going to have pathways in which local jurisdictions can be innovative, can be excited, can decide to do things, and BAFA provides the infrastructure to do that. And so not, again, because they have the staff, they have the expertise that'll get most of the 109 jurisdictions in the Bay Area could never set up on its own. And great. Yeah. And again, one last thing for those who follow the JPA space, one of the reasons I like that you're doing it is that these already exist. They're already being used to finance housing. They're just not necessarily done by JPAs that share our values, that share our goals, that share the outcomes, that share the creativity when it comes to equity. But they are a tool that has proven to channel, millions and millions of dollars into housing. And it's about time that the better kind of public agencies up here in the Bay, we kind of start doing our own JPAs and using this. There's a couple of questions that we didn't have time for. I want to make sure that we have time for Waskar to send us off. Neil, I don't know if you can answer them. I could answer them quickly, but that's not my job. Maybe somebody can answer them in the typing, but Waskar, do you want to take us home and tell us where this is all going and how people can stay connected?
Yeah, absolutely. If any process questions do it, Neil can answer them. But if not, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk more offline. I don't think the 25-minute presentation was enough to really encompass all the work and that we've done over the past year and change on this. So thank you so much, Alex, for really moderating this conversation. Thank you so much, Jeffrey, for that presentation. And thank you to our entire audience for being here, for your questions, and for your engagement. As you all can see, there's been a lot of work to get us to this point, and there's plenty more to do to bring this initiative into fruition. Over the next few months, we will be actively exploring demonstration projects to actually test these principles on real sites. We're also looking to continue to work across sectors. Across sectors with partners, including past working group members who have helped actively shape the model, subject matter experts, unions, local governments, educational institutions such as IMS, and more to collectively move this from research to reality. We've also been doing a lot of work within the city of San Jose to actually move forward through the budget process, directing staff to identify resources, for a demonstration project. And a lot of that specifically references our working families housing model and working partnerships as a collaborator in developing the governance and finance structures to scale this work. Over the next few months, we should be able to officially release research findings to the public, where you'll have the opportunity to read about our working families housing model in detail, which will span our financing and government's recommendations for building affordable homes cheaply, quickly, with good union jobs. This will be accompanied by a website and external facing opportunities to engage a broader set of folks. So please be on the lookout. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to the entire IMS crew for inviting us to this space to present on this very important topic. And take care, everyone, and please have a great rest of your day.
Happy Affordable Housing Month. Thanks, everyone.
And
Bye,
happy
everyone.
Affordable Housing Month. Absolutely. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Gordon.
Thanks, Gordon.
Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you, guys.
Appreciate you.
Bye, everybody.